we've moved to a third stand, still relatively close to the previous two spots. At first glance, it looks relatively similar to the stand we were in, where there were ecological objectives led to a fuel removal. So we can see there's been some harvesting and it's relatively open, but the objectives and management here are a little bit different. John, can you tell us what were the objectives in this stand that we're in?
Yeah, so the stand we were in just before this one was an ecosystem restoration. This one is a field management. So this is a landscape level field break to protect the city of Williams Lake and the community. It's very long, it's 300 meters wide. We want the fine fuels to be down to about, I think it's 10 tons per hectare, whereas we didn't have that objective on the other stand. We just wanted it to be at a level that was safe for a prescribed burn. A couple of different things happened in here. We had hand crews come in, cut everything that the buncher couldn't get that would still be a ladder or a field that's underneath the canopy. We had them come and prune so that it's about 3 meters high, that it's pruned to get that gap between the ground where ground fire would be and the canopy of the trees. And we had an excavator with a rake come in and rake up all of the debris that's on the forest floor for fine fuels and put them in a pile, and that will be burnt this fall.
This strip of forest certainly still would burn in a severe fire, but it's kind of a somewhat defensible barrier around the community where it would be less likely to be a crown fire. It might be more likely to be a surface fire, and this would just be a good line of defense for firefighters to use.
There's two things. The fire, if it was a crown fire coming this way, it would knock down to being a ground fire, so we could defend that way. It's also a good spot to start a back burn.
Got it. So this could be lit by firefighters and it would be a low intensity fire, and then by the time the main fire reached this part would have already burned, so there would be very little fuel for the fire to sustain itself, so it would be easier to make this as to defend against the fire at this location.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. And you already touched on this just a little bit, but as I look around here, the main difference that jumps out at me between this site and the last one is I see a bunch of slash piles here, and I don't see very much slash on the ground, whereas in the ecological restoration site, the slash wasn't piled up, and there wasn't, I wouldn't say a ton of slash, not like you see after a clear cut or something, but there was kind of an even distribution of slash on the ground. Can you talk about the two different objectives and how and why the slash was managed differently between these two sites?
Yeah, well, to do that, I'm going to describe the whole field break. So there's the stand over that way. There wasn't enough big trees with the mule deer habitat, so all we could remove is stems under 12.5 centimeters dBH. So all the smaller ladder fuels. So we used a buncher to cut them. Anything that might make pulp, we still skidded out. But the rest we tried to scatter to get a little bit more fuel to carry a fire. This stand here, part of the reason it is the way it is that we didn't catch the harvesting crew at the right stage to leave more fuel on the ground to carry a fire. And knowing that it wouldn't carry a fire, we went to the piling method.
If there had been a bit more fuel here, you might have just done a prescribed burn to remove the fuel. But since there wasn't quite enough to leave it in place and burn it, now you've piled it up so that will you come back in winter and burn the individual piles?
As said, that other stand, we left enough fuel for a prescribed burn. We actually have a stand over there too that the only management is a burn. That one being that it has more pine, the fir are more spaced out. There's a bit more deciduous, so it shouldn't get as spicy as, say, the first stand we were in. With this prescribed burn, we're going to do it aerial ignition because it's over 100 hectares. We know that from what we tried last fall that we can do about 45 hectares in a day. It's going to be such a short window in the fall that has the right moisture and dryness. And so that if we have the one day, we can do it with aerial ignition and complete it.
So that'll allow you to kind of respond more quickly and get it going.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, when they first learn about prescribed fire, don't realize like how precise it needs to be and what a narrow range of conditions. So we already talked in the ecologically in the site where we did the ecological treatment about how you tried to balance the fuel loads to have enough for a sustained fire, but not so much that it's going to damage the trees that you want to remain. And those Douglas fir are naturally relatively fire resistant, so they are well suited to handle that fire. But of course, you don't want it to get too severe in spots. So that's the fuel kind of needs to be in that sweet spot. But then the climate, or the weather, I should say, because it's a local thing. The weather needs to be in that sweet spot where it's warm enough and dry enough to sustain a fire, but cool enough and wet enough that that fire is going to stay at low intensity and not get out of control. Can you explain a little bit what an aerial ignition is? How does that actually work?
Yeah, so the aerial ignition is from a helicopter. They have the little, we call them ping pong balls, but it has a little ball that gets injected with, I believe it's antifreeze, which causes a chemical reaction, and then it will start to burn. So with the helicopter, they can be very precise. We're actually going to try to burn these piles at the same time.
Try to drop
to save time, basically.
And that will allow you to, if you were on the ground lighting the fire with a drip torch, you can only cover, or even on an ATV, you can only cover a certain amount of range. But in a helicopter, you could potentially cover a really large range in a short period of time when that weather window is just in that perfect range.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then if we were doing it hand ignition with drip torches, then we have to have crews that are set for ignition. With the aerial, now we'll have everybody on holding to try to well, we will make sure it stays within the boundaries. So that's more, allows us to use our resources better. To bring fire back to the landscape, a good fire back to the landscape, it's going to take a lot of resources. Although we're just starting, we've already created more land to have fire reintroduced than we have capacity to do.
Yeah.
So bringing in aerial ignition, that's going to help us achieve the goal of putting good fire back on the landscape.
Yeah. And I know those weather windows are so small, just often a small window in spring and a small window in fall. And so it's not like silviculture where you can potentially do that year round with a few restrictions. You really are time-wise restricted in what you're able to do.
Yeah, definitely. One of the blocks that was scheduled to be burnt this spring may have had 1 week.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what venting was in that period. So that's another part, is taking in, you want a day when there's good venting so that the smoke doesn't
ascend.
Hold in the...
That goes into my follow-up question. On the social end, I know one challenge with prescribed burn is people don't like breathing smoke for a good reason. And also people can get nervous about prescribed fire near communities because, like, rarely, but occasionally prescribed fires do escape. Is that much of an issue here? Or because Williams Lake had a very large fire in quite recent memory and the town was at risk, do you think that makes people a little bit more amenable to dealing with a day or two that might be smoky or having prescribed fire going on?
That's actually a really interesting question. So with our Bond Lake block we burnt last fall, we had sent out brochures, had lots of media talking about it, and nobody said anything about the prescribed fire. I guess I was expecting comments to come back about that.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't get negative feedback on that?
There was a couple during the actual day of the burn, but very, very minimal. Mm-hmm. And that was a fall burn. This spring we did a burn in the community forest. You could see the smoke from town. It was quite a ways away. Mm-hmm. And that one, I heard more people talk about post-traumatic stress and stuff from that fire. And I'm making an assumption here that it was because it was in the spring leading into the summer instead of the fall leading into the winter. But overall, Williams Lake is a resource town or city. So it's pretty open to that, and everybody knows we're trying to make it better. Yeah. So the public is pretty accepting to it.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear about the community response to the prescribed burning because the social aspect is really important, and I think if people haven't been exposed to wildfire, and I think the risk people understand the risk, but I think it's a very abstract thing. Whereas if you've lived somewhere where you've had to evacuate, or there have been fires nearby that may have directly impacted you, I think people might do the math a little bit differently in their head about what they're willing to accept for prescribed fire.
It's a new learning, I guess. We've been taught that fire's bad for a century, and fire's a tool, and that's, if used correctly, it can make us, the ecosystem, better and the community safer. And that's what First Nations did, and that's where we're trying to go back to.